In a clustered kind of a network, the individual will just give the news to only those trusted persons with whom he can trust the information. Whenever you have to communicate, it will be in the form of words and sentences, and if these words and sentences are understood by the receiver in a different way, we know that all job positions have their own status, they have their own authority and responsibility relationships. Hello everyone, I am Purnima, faculty in the Department of Commerce, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence. In this session on communication, I will be discussing about formal communication and informal communication and what are the various barriers to communication. Now, just let us look into what is the meaning of the word formal communication. Now, in formal communication, we should understand that it is communication which flows through official channels designed in the organization chart. So, we all know that in every organization, there exists an organization chart. Now, this organization chart consists of the various positions in the organization. So, we would have created positions for all the departments of the organization, and each position will have its own responsibility and it will have its own authority and duties. So, the flow of communication will be through all these job positions. So, whatever communication has to come from top management, it will be flowing through these positions in the organizational chart. So, we should understand that formal communication is anything which is written, or it may be through orally also, or it may be anything related to the activities of that particular department. So, formal communication includes orders, notices, etc. So, whether they are giving any orders to the subordinate or they are issuing any notice to the subordinate, all this will be in the form of formal communication. And this formal communication will be usually in writing, and it will be filed and it will be maintained in the organization. Now, in continuation of the meaning of the word formal communication, we should understand that communication may take place between the superior and the subordinate, or a subordinate and superior, or among some cadre of employees or managers. So, whether it is between the superior and the subordinate or between the subordinate and the superior, all this will be included in formal communication. So, formal communication will be related to the job positions, or it will be between the all the authorities of the particular department. So, in formal communication, we will be also seeing that there is communication between the subordinate and the superior. In formal communication, we understand that there is communication between the subordinate and the superior. So, this communication between the subordinate and the superior may be in the form of requisition for leave, or it may be in the form of any of his reports which he has to submit to his superior. So, we should understand that formal communication exists in an organization for carrying out the various activities of the organization. Now, in continuation of this meaning of the word formal communication, we should understand that it is further classified as vertical communication and horizontal communication. Now, vertical communication flows vertically, that is upwards or downwards. So, this sort of a directions of communication. So, it may flow up. Upwards means it is from the subordinate to the superior, and downwards means from the superior to the subordinate, and it will always flow through formal channels. So, we should understand that it follows the chain of command. So, whenever there is any communication between the superior and the subordinate, it has to follow the chain of command. Now, in continuation of this, let us see what do you mean by upward communication. So, upward communication refers to the flow of communication from the subordinate to the superior. So, as I had explained in my previous slide, it is always the flow of communication from the subordinate to the superior, whereas downward communication means it is from the superior to the subordinate. So, the superior is in the top position and the subordinate will be here, and any flow of communication between the superior and the subordinate will be regarded as upward communication or downward communication. So, the image also suggests that there is a upward communication, and if there is any flow of communication from the superior to the subordinate, it will be downward communication. Now, the next in the form of formal communication is horizontal or lateral communication. Now, what is this horizontal communication? So, as the picture itself suggests, it is a communication existing between the persons of the same level in the organization. So, it takes place between one division and another. Now, let's see an example of what is horizontal communication. So, production manager may contact marketing manager to discuss about schedule of a product delivery, product design, quality, etc. So, if you can take the example of this, so there is a communication between the marketing department head and the production department head. Now, production department head will be responsible for the production of finished products, which will have to be marketed by the marketing department head. Now, if this production department head does not send the goods on time, it cannot be marketed by the marketing manager. So, he will have to discuss about the product schedule, when the goods will be ready, when it will arrive, and what are the products which are coming, and what is the quality of the products. So, all this will have to be discussed by the department of head of marketing and also between the production department head. So, when there is communication between these two departmental heads, we call it as horizontal communication, or it is lateral communication, where communication is among the job positions or the same level of job positions. Whenever they communicate with each other, we call it as lateral or horizontal communication. Then, we can let us look into what are the various communication networks. Now, in this first we have this chain network, and second figure shows the wheel network. Now, just let us look into the meaning of the word single chain. So, this network exists between a supervisor and his subordinates. Now, the single chain, as the figure itself suggests, there is communication. Suppose we call this person as A, B, C, D and E. So, there is a communication between A to B, B to C, C to D and D to E. So, this line of communication is followed whenever there is anything to be communicated. So, this line of communication follows a chain, and so we call it as chain communication. So, it is existing between the supervisor and his subordinates. Now, in the second one, we have the wheel. So, in the wheel network, all subordinates under one superior communicate through him only, as he acts as the hub of the wheel. Now, here we have the supervisor, and this supervisor will be communicating between all his subordinates. So, he is in the middle of the wheel, and whatever communication he has to give, he will be personally giving it to all his subordinates. Now, we have A here, B here, C here and D here, and this is the superior. He will be personally conveying to A, he will be personally conveying to B, C and D. So this sort of a wheel, that is where the superior is in the middle of the wheel and subordinates are around him. When he communicates personally with each of them, then we call this kind of a communication network as the wheel. Now, the next form of communication network is circular. Now, what is this circular? In a circular network, the communication moves in a circle. Now, if you can just see here, the drawing here, this is A, B, C, D and E. Now, there is communication between A to B, B to C, C to D and D to E. So, there is a flow of communication in a circular manner, which we call it as the circular communication, and again it goes from E to A. So, this sort of a communication network, we call it as circular network. The next kind of network is free flow. In this network, each person can communicate with others freely. Now, here we have this free flow, and again, if we can name all these persons as A, B, C, D and E. So, we have a network between A and B, B to C, C to D, D to E and again E to A. And again, there is cross lines of communication, A to D, A to C, E to B and E to C and C. So, there are various cross lines of communication, and as such, they don't follow a particular pattern. So, there is a free flow of communication in the organization, and this communication, we call it as free flow. Now, the fifth type of communication network is inverted V. So, inverted V means V which is inverted. So, in this network, a subordinate is allowed to communicate with his immediate superior as well as his other superiors. And so, here we can see that in the inverted V, we have these persons A, B, C and D. So, in this network, a subordinate is allowed to communicate with his immediate superior. So, this D is the immediate superior, and he can also communicate with the superior of this D. So, A is the superior of D and D has two subordinates, that is C and B. Now, the C and B can communicate with D as well as they can communicate with A. Now, this sort of a communication network, we call it as the inverted V. Now, the next type of communication is informal communication. Now, let us look into what is the meaning of the word informal communication. So, communication that takes place without following the formal lines of communication is said to be informal communication. So, in informal system of communication, it is generally referred to as the grapevine because it spreads throughout the organization with its branches going out in all directions in utter disregard to the levels of authority. So, this is a type of communication which has evolved because of the necessity of the informal members of the group. So, whenever they want to communicate with the members of the group, they will use this sort of informal communication. So, there are no formal lines of channels of communication here, and then the members can discuss freely whatever they want. It may be nothing related to the job, and it may be any gossip or any matters of interest which is among the group members. Now, this sort of informal communication, we refer to it as the grapevine because it spreads throughout the organization with its branches growing out in all directions. If you have observed a grapevine, it will be growing in all directions without any break. So, in the same way, this informal communication, it will be growing in the organization without any break, and any matter which is relating to the informal members of the group or the formal members of the group, it will be discussed in this informal communication. So it is considered as the grapevine because we cannot identify the source of information. So it may be like spreading rumors about some of the employees, or it may be something relating to the job, or it may be any news relating to the superior or the boss about his behavior, etc. So this sort of informal communication exists in every organization, and this kind of informal organization or informal communication can be made use of by the managers to collect feedback from the subordinates. Now, let us look into what is this grapevine network. So, in the grapevine communication, the communication may flow in the different types of network. So, there may be a single strand, that is, there is one single chain of communication which is going on here. Just like in the formal communication, we have this one single chain. Here also we have this one single chain. That is, the grapevine communication may follow different types of network. So in the single strand, this is also one kind of grapevine network. Now, in gossip network, each person communicates with all or non-selective basis. So let us look into in gossip network. So in this gossip network, so there will be one person who is spreading the gossip and he may tell it to everybody. So this sort of a network, that is A, B, C, D and E. So he is just spreading the news or rumors to everybody whom he meets. The informal system of communication is considered as the grapevine because it flows without any control. So just as the grapevine creeper grows and grows and grows, the same way this informal channel or informal system of communication will be growing. So any amount of any news which is related to the superior, or it may be related to the employees, or it may be any gossip, etc. So it will be just circulated in this informal groups, and in this informal group we should understand that it transcends all levels of authority. Now let us next look into what are the various types of grapevine network. Now in this types of grapevine network, we should understand that the first one is the single strand network. So in the single strand network, it follows the chain network of the formal communication. Now here if we see that 1, 2, 3, 4. That is, it follows this same chain. That is A, B, C, D. Communication is flowing from A, B, C and D. So this type of a communication, we call it as single strand network. Next, in gossip network, each person communicates with all on a non-selective basis. Now, the second type of a grapevine network is the gossip network. In this gossip network, the person can spread rumors to everybody. So he will not select to whom he is talking or whom to is not talking. So he will just try to give this news to everybody whom he meets on his way. So this is one type of network, that is the gossip network, and there are no fixed channels of communication here. Now, third one, we have the probability network. So in this probability network, the individual communicates randomly with other individuals. So whomever he meets on the way, he can just spread the news and just see that it travels very, very fast. Now, the next type of a grapevine network is the cluster. So in cluster, the individual communicates only with those people whom he trusts. So of these 4 types of networks, cluster is the most popular in the organization. So in a cluster kind of a network, the individual will just give the news to only those trusted persons with whom he can trust the information. And among these 4 types of grapevine network, we should understand that the cluster is one of the most popular networks in an organization. The next part of the chapter we discuss about barriers to communication. So we should understand that whenever the manager has to give any instructions to his subordinates, there may be a breakdown in the communication network. This breakdown in the communication network is termed as barriers to communication. If you can just see in the picture here, this person is the sender of the message and this person is the receiver of the message. So in this we can see that there is a wall in between, which we can call it as the barrier. So what are the various barriers to communication? In this, the first barrier is called as the semantic barrier. So let us understand what is the meaning of the word semantic. Semantic is the branch of linguistics dealing with the meaning of words and sentences. So it is that branch of linguistics which deals with the meaning of words and sentences. So whenever you have to communicate, it will be in the form of words and sentences, and if these words and sentences are understood by the receiver in a different way, that will give rise to problems in communication. So just let us look into what are the various semantic barriers here. Now, in the first type of semantic barriers, we see that first one is badly expressed message. So, in this badly expressed message, we see that the manager is not able to just convey the message with the proper intention. So whatever is the intention with which he is sending the message, that intention is not fulfilled. Now why it is not fulfilled? It is because the manager does not know how to frame the sentence, or he has a poor vocabulary, or because of loss of proper words, or there may be omission of the needed word. So all this leads to badly expressed messages. Now the second type of a semantic barrier is symbols with different meanings. So in the symbols with different meanings, we should understand that in English language we have homophones, or one word which has many meanings. So it may be, for example, lie. A lie means untruth, or down means something to just sleep. So or it may be like bat. A bat represents an animal. A bat also represents the cricket bat. So there are so many words in English language which have different meanings, and when we use these words, the receiver may just understand it in a different manner. So when he understands these words in a different manner, it leads to barriers to communication. Now, the third type of barriers to communication is faulty translations. As you all know, whenever instructions are given by the superior to the subordinate, it will be in technical language. So it may be relating to the use of machinery, or he may be referring to any machine parts, etc. So these, when we are using this technical language, we have to see that there is proper translation of that in the local language which the employees usually understand. So whenever there is a poor translation of these technical words, it may lead to misunderstanding among the employees. So he may understand it in a wrong manner, which is a barrier to communication. Then the next kind of semantic barrier is unclarified assumptions. So what is this unclarified assumptions? Now, whenever there is a communication from the sender to the receiver may have his own assumptions about the sender, or he may not trust the sender. In such cases, whatever the message the sender sends, this receiver may not take it in the proper way, or he may just misunderstand whatever the sender is sending. Now, in this fourth one, unclarified assumptions, we should understand that there are certain assumptions which the receiver will be having about the sender. So whenever the sender sends a message, he may not take it in the right spirit. So that gives rise to a barriers of communication. Then the next one is the technical jargon. So in this technical jargon, we should understand that there are certain words which are used by specialists in their daily lives, in their communication, which will not be understood by those who are non-specialists in that field. For example, a commerce student will understand that drawings means it is anything which the owner takes it from his business. So it may be cash or it may be any goods which he withdraws from his business is considered as drawings. But if he is a non-commerce student, he will not understand the meaning of the word drawing and he may just interpret as some picture or something like that. So in the same way, in this kind of a technical jargons, when we are using technical terms with non-technical persons, they may not take it in the same spirit or they may not take it in the same meaning. So that we call it as technical jargons. And then the sixth one is body language and gesture decoding. Now, what is this body language and gesture decoding? Now, in the last one, sixth one, body language and gesture decoding, we should understand that whenever a person is communicating, he will be using his gestures, just the way I am using my gestures. The same way this communicator will also be using his gestures and he will have his own body language. Now, if there is a mismatch between what is telling and what is his gesture, then that also gives rise to barriers to communication. Then the next kind of barrier is psychological barriers. Now, what are these psychological barriers? Now, first thing is emotional or psychological factors acts as barriers to communication. When the receiver is not in a position to listen to what the sender is telling, then it gives rise to emotional or psychological barriers. So, if the person is preoccupied with something or if the receiver is worried about something and if there is a message from the sender, then he may not pay attention to that message. So, that gives rise to psychological barriers. Then, we should understand that the state of mind of both sender and receiver of communication reflects in the effective communication. So, whenever there is any communication between the sender and the receiver, it should be in the proper sense and it should be between the persons with normal state of mind. So, the sender also should be in proper state of mind and the receiver also should be calm and serene. Only when there is a communication between these two persons, then we can say that there is effective communication. Or if the receiver is preoccupied or he is worried with something and then he receives a message from the sender, then this gives rise to barriers to communication. Now, in the psychological barriers, we should understand the first one is premature evaluation. So, it may be due to preconceived notions or prejudices against the communication. So, even before we receive the communication, we jump into different notions or we have some idea or we just think that this sort of a communication is coming. So, we anticipate some communication before it is actually coming. So, this we call it as premature evaluation. Then, second one is lack of attention. The preoccupied mind of the receiver and the resultant non-listening of message acts as a major psychological barrier. Now, whenever the superior is hearing to the problems of the subordinate, the superior is not actually listening. He will be just keeping quiet, but he will be preoccupied with his own thoughts. So, when he is preoccupied with his own thoughts, he is not actually listening to what the subordinate is telling. So, this we call it as a psychological barrier. Then, the next type of a psychological barrier is loss by transmission and poor retention. Now, what is the meaning of loss by transmission and poor retention? So, people cannot retain the information for a very long time if they are inattentive or not interested. So, as we all know that communication channels will be open from the top level to the lowest levels of communication. So, whatever communication has to come, it will be flowing from the topmost levels to the various lower levels of the organization. Now, even this happens So it has to flow through the various levels of the organization, and when there is a flow of various levels in the organization, some of the communication may get distorted, or there may be a loss of words. So when they are inattentive, whenever the receiver of the communication is not paying much attention to whatever is being told, then we call it as loss by transmission and poor retention. Sometimes we just listen to the message in a half-hearted manner, and we just forget one part, we remember, the next part we forget. So this we call it as loss by transmission and poor retention. Then the next type of psychological barrier is distrust. If the parties do not believe each other, they cannot understand each other's message in its original sense. Now, if the sender and the receiver, they don't trust each other, or they are enemies, or they are not on talking terms, but then suddenly one fine day the sender is sending a message to the receiver, then the receiver will not take it in the proper intention. So this is what we mean by distrust. So he will not believe whatever the sender is telling. So this is one kind of psychological barrier. So we should understand that there are other types of barriers also. Now, so far we have discussed the first one is the semantic barrier, second one is the psychological barrier. The next type of barriers to communication is organizational barriers. Now let us understand what is an organizational barrier. The factors related to the organization structure, authority relationships, rules and regulations may sometimes act as barriers to effective communication. So, as we all know, in an organization, we have various levels of management. We also have various levels of authority. We have different rules and regulations. So, all this may act as a barrier to communication. Now, let us look into what are the various types of organizational barriers. Now, in this, the first one is organizational policy. If you can see here, there is policies and procedures. They may act as a barrier to communication. So, if the organizational policy, explicit or implicit, is not supportive to the free flow of communication, it may hamper effectiveness of communication. So, if there is a policy in the organization which hinders the free flow of communication, then that will be a barrier to communication. There are some communications which should not be told, and some communications which can be conveyed to the lowest levels. So, a proper demarcation should be done as to what has to be communicated to the subordinate and what should not be communicated to the subordinate. So, this relates to the organizational policy. Now, the second type of organizational barrier is rules and regulations. Now, rigid rules and cumbersome procedures may be a hurdle to communication. Now, why we call it as rigid rules? Whenever we talk about an organization, we also talk about the chain of command or the scalar chain. If you can remember, in Henry Fayol, we have discussed the scalar chain existing in any organization. So, this scalar chain should see that there is a free flow of communication. Suppose this chain gets distorted, or if there is any cut in the chain, then it may act as a barrier to communication. Then, so the rigid rules and cumbersome procedures may be a hurdle to communication. Then the next organizational barrier is the status. The status of the superior may create psychological distance between him and his subordinates. A status conscious manager also may not allow his subordinates to express their feelings freely. Now we know that all job positions have their own status, they have their own authority and responsibility relationships. Now, if there has to be any communication between the superior and the subordinate, there may be a superior who is more status conscious, and because of his status, he may not allow the subordinate to express his feelings freely. So, this may create a barrier to communication. Then, the next one in the organizational barrier is complexity in organizational structure. So in an organization where there are number of managerial levels, communication gets delayed and distorted as number of filtering points are more. If you can see this, there are a lot of clusters here and there are a lot of this filtering points. So in these points, the messages get filtered and it goes to the next level. So when there are more and more levels of communication in an organization, the message which goes to the ultimate receiver will be filtered through all these channels and ultimately it will reach the receiver, which is not very good. So this sort of filters, we call it as organizational barriers. Then the last type of organizational barrier is organizational facilities. So if facilities for smooth, clear and timely communications are not provided, communications may be hampered. So there should be proper provision for smooth, clear and timely communication. If it is not present in any organization, then it may act as an organizational barrier. Then next we should just understand what are the various types of organizational facility which we can create for the free and smooth flow of communication. So we should see that there are frequent meetings. So whenever there is any discussion between the superior and the subordinates, he should call a meeting of the subordinates and see that proper information has been conveyed to them. Then next one is the suggestion box. So the superior can also request for suggestions from his subordinates. Then complaint box. So if there is any complaints regarding any of the facilities provided in the organization, the employee should be free to complain it and it will be through the complaint box. And then social and cultural gathering. So whenever there is a social and cultural gathering in the organization, it will facilitate the free flow of communication. Then transparency in operations. So whenever the activities of the organization have to be carried out, we should see that all activities which are to be carried out will be, the employees are informed about all these activities, as a result of which there is transparency in operations. So all these facilities will encourage the free flow of communication. We have come to the end of this session on communication. In this session, I have discussed what is formal communication, what is informal communication, what are the various types of formal and informal communication, what are the various communication networks which exist in formal communication and informal communication, and I have also told you or discussed in this session what are the various barriers to communication. Hope you have all understood. Thank you.